Day to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Philippine Star and Property Report.ph's webinar entitled Sustainability in the City, Planning Responsibly for This Generation and the Next. I'm Issa Litton, and I will be your host for today's event. First off, this event would not be possible without SMDC, who was our major sponsor for today. Thank you so much, SMDC. So allow me to set our virtual stage for our discussion. While the health crisis dominated much of our attention over the past 2 years, how we have adapted has become a vital issue. Yes, now more than ever, sustainability is becoming less of a trend and actually becoming more of an essential concept that we need to incorporate into our lifestyle. So as the world around us changes, it asks us to make more mindful and socially responsible decisions. Energy sufficiency, safety, building resilient structures, climate risk, and economic opportunities, as well as environmental considerations, have actually now become critical considerations in the property sector. And as younger generations who carry a greater sense of social consciousness are now entering the home buying market, this urges real estate developers to evolve their values, strategies, and practices to be responsibly aligned with values directed towards shaping a more sustainable future. So as we meet with today's esteemed guests, we aim to examine the substantive role of building sustainable cities and communities as a powerful driver for making the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals, or SDG, come to fruition. I hope you're excited to learn, because we're about to begin. Allow me to introduce our first panelist, David Leechiu. He is the CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants, Inc., or LPC, who has 26 years of experience in real estate and is considered the Philippines' leading commercial real estate broker. He has arranged the lease of more than 1 million square meters of office space and sold more than $2 billion in real estate. Having co-founded Leechiu and Associates, or LNA, in 2003, he elevated the firm's status as the country's top real estate brokerage. In 2008, LNA merged with a Fortune 500 real estate company, where David led its growth to exceed the combined revenues of their competitors, serving there as the country manager and the only Filipino international director until 2015. He is co-founder and shareholder of the W Group, known in the industry for its world-class office buildings in Bonifacio Global City, and as current board of trustee of the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, or IBPAP. David has been instrumental in the creation of the Digital Cities 2025 program, a joint effort with IBPAP and the Department of Information and Communications Technology. So everyone, let's say hi to Mr. David Leechiu. Hi, David.
Hello, Issa. Thank you for having me in your program. And thank you, SMDC.
It's going to be such a pleasure to have a chat with you. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Good. I mean, we have survived and dodged this Omicron variant. It's been pretty good. Unfortunately, I haven't found a Omicron-free barber, so you have to pardon my hairstyle. And I'm in the province right now, so
well, lots of fresh air.
Yeah, and always swimming in the sea. So.
Oh, that's nice. I wish I could join you there. But yeah, definitely sea breeze, natural surroundings, that will make sure that your immune system is going to be boosted up. I wish you well, and I'm looking forward to our chat. So allow me to introduce who will be joining us. Thanks, David. All right. Our second panelist is Mr. Michael Powell. Michael Powell is a senior associate principal with SOM's City Design Practice. Michael is based in Melbourne and is responsible for the delivery of urban design and master planning projects across the Australian and ASEAN region. He is an experienced designer with international portfolio of award-winning projects, including downtowns, new communities, urban regeneration, corporate and institutional campus projects. His work is distinguished by His work is distinguished by a sensitivity to each project's unique setting and vision, as well as issues such as scale, landscape, public space, transportation, and sustainability. Let's say hi to Mr. Michael Powell. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Issa. Good to see you.
Hi. I believe you're in Melbourne. Thank you for joining us. Don't you just love being in this digital space where suddenly there's no physical boundaries?
That's right. The world is so enormous yet so small. So yeah, I'm here in Melbourne and it's a beautiful day and we have the Australian Open playing today. And it's great to see the city coming slowly back to life with some international visitors and lots of activities.
Well, that's good. And I hope you're keeping safe over there too. You know what?
Yeah.
Let's begin our discussion. In fact, let's bring back David. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Give a warm virtual welcome to both our panelists joining us today as we now examine the importance of building more sustainable cities, not only for our generation, but the generations to come. So again, hi, David, and hi, Michael. I'm going to put David in the hot seat first. So let's begin with David. With my intro, I've said the word sustainability a lot of times. Sustainability is not exactly a buzzword nowadays. It's been around for years already. But what exactly does it mean for Filipinos, especially given our environmental state today? I don't think it's still a normal thing. Is that true?
Yes, sustainability in the environment is very far from our minds because we still have very basic needs, which is food, shelter. There's a 6 million backlog, 6 million home backlog for people
in the Philippines.
In the Philippines, that's about 20 million people that are still homeless in the Philippines or are living
wow,
in
that's across the country, yeah? Not
across
just
the country.
In NCR.
Yeah, that's all across the country. And if they are not homeless, they are living in very, very fragile shelters. Yes, and so that's one. Number two is that less than 2% of the Philippines have access to sewage treatment plants, which means that everything that we flush goes straight to the rivers and the lakes and the sea.
That's why pollution is still high.
Yeah. And then fortunately the factories are fairly well regulated now today in 2022 compared to what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And second, unlike many countries in Asia, the Philippines was never a viable location for manufacturing and heavy industry. And I guess we should look at that as a blessing because then the impact to the environment was very small.
And so in that sense of the word, of sustainability. Yeah.
So wow, I think we're very basic. We're still in very basic level, and it's very good that we're learning from countries like Thailand, Indonesia, China, Vietnam, and how to adapt best practices so that we avoid the problems that they're going through.
Nice. And now Australia, because we have Michael Powell with us, who actually lived in San Francisco for a couple of years, if not a decade, right, Michael?
That's right.
David gave a very, apt description of what sustainability is in the Philippines. And unfortunately, like he said, it's still very basic. So why do people need to take sustainability into consideration? And really speaking to a Filipino audience, why should they even learn about sustainability when making lifestyle decisions, especially when it comes to shelter, real estate? How does this contribute to the bigger environmental issue that David already pointed out? One of which, by the way, is climate change.
Yeah, well, that's a really key point. I think part of it is the macro issue of, the Philippines and its location in the world. And I was reading recently, depending on which report you read, it's either the Philippines or Japan that is the most likely to be at risk due to the climate crisis and climate change. Impacts of sea level rise, extreme weather events that lead to inland flooding, typhoons, etc. So I think the real question about sustainability is really more about to what extent can we design our cities and buildings and infrastructure to address climate change, and how do we use sustainable design to become more climate positive. And I think it's a well-known fact that the urban environment accounts for about 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a big job ahead of us, and as designers, as developers, as people in the industry, to start to think about how to eliminate these emissions and address climate change head on.
Part of the question I asked you, Michael, is why people need to take sustainability into consideration. I love how you pointed out that, the Philippines and Japan are very, how do I say this? Susceptible to disasters countries, especially with the environment. And since we brought up climate change already, somehow we can't seem to learn that we know we get hit, especially by super typhoons. Should we really always go for, okay, my house was washed away or blown away, right? So maybe that's a good push to why people need to take sustainability into consideration, because that's part of it, right?
Yeah. I mean, and the issue is it's hard to sometimes detach your sort of immediate issues, your lifestyle and quality of life from the bigger picture. But I think everyone has a role to play, from government and its policy around, particularly around the urban environment, how cities grow, where they grow and in what form, to address some of those bigger issues. Because you as an individual cannot control everything. You definitely cannot control some of these larger macro issues that are influencing you. So we do need to have appropriate governance. We need to be, as a development community and design community, working in the same direction and giving people the opportunity to live a more sustainable lifestyle by providing them those resources, whether it's housing, transportation and infrastructure, access to open space, and the resiliency that the cities need to address these climate change issues.
Thank you for that, Michael. So back to David, given what Michael just actually laid out, that it's not just about, I need this in my house. And, earlier you pointed out, David, that even something as basic as the sewage system, not everybody has. So does the market reflect the value of sustainability, given the issues we just pointed out? If it does, how does the future readiness of developments play a role in decision-making for buyers? Because after all, we're making a push for available homes. And there is a market for homes. People are looking into buying real estate. However, how do they consider future readiness?
Yeah, so I'll start with the big picture. And the big picture is that if we look at the last 20 years, the per capita income of the Philippines doubled. And in all likelihood, that per capita income will double again within 20 years, most likely in 15 years, in 12 years. So
again, let's not think about now, because a lot of people are saying still jobless for now, but things will pick up. That's why we're thinking 15 years. Yeah. There are all these people saying that the poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer. I don't think that's the case. I genuinely don't think that's the case. And there's a lot of wealth coming and entering into the Philippines. And the two biggest drivers of that, as we all know, is the overseas remittances, which today is $30 billion to $35 billion a year, whereas 20 years ago it was only $5 billion. Just imagine the impact of that, right? The second is the BPO jobs. 20 years ago, there were 1,000 BPO jobs in the Philippines. 1,000. Today, there's 1.3, 1.4 million jobs directly in the BPO sector. Wow. So that has generated so much wealth through the country, which is why you've seen this massive construction boom in the last 15 years. And a lot of, and the second big picture here is interest rates. And the interest rates have fallen to historical lows today for the Philippines. A big chunk of that is because of the credit ratings that we have achieved in this country. The credit rating of the Philippines is one of the best, is the best it's ever been in history. And it's one of the few countries in the world that have sustained the credit rating. They did not get a downgrade. And these three things, the
creation of wealth, the collapse of interest rates, and these two things just produced a massive demand for real estate, and allowing people to look beyond the needs now, but look into the future. We have to consider two things. Directly in the Philippines is hit by at least 20 typhoons a year. In 10 years' time, that's 200 typhoons. The statistics of 200 typhoons, one of them being a major Category 5 disaster, is quite high, which is why we had Ondoy, which is why we had Odette. Coincidentally, they're both O's. So, I think the span is more or less about 8 to 10 years apart. No, when we had Ondoy massively go through a big chunk of the Visayas and NCR, and Odette doing Visayas. But the second thing is, so we have to plan around that. But the second thing is that we can't do anything about the carbon footprint, mainly because the contribution of the Philippines to the carbon footprint is negligible. If from what I remember,
very low. Okay.
It's not even a rounding number. It's a rounding number to the rounding number. There are, I think, three countries. There are only 3 or 4 countries in the world that are responsible for 60% of the entire carbon footprint of the world. Okay.
And they're the superpowers.
And so I think we just have to focus on what we can really do something about. And it goes back to basics. Cleaning up the ocean, at least within the geography of the Philippines, the political jurisdiction of the Philippines. And, as you know, we have this dispute with China. And that's a whole big discussion. But second, really, is how to clean up our own stuff, meaning focus on, because the money is so big, the money required is so big. So we just focus on a couple of priorities, and that is sewage systems, open spaces for people in highly dense populations, and third, cleaning up the oceans. And to which
that's something we can do. That's something that's within our power to be able to do.
Control.
Yeah.
And to commend our sponsor SMDC, they're actually one of the biggest proponents of open space, because if you look at many of their projects throughout the country, they've committed to a lot of open space for the projects. By that meaning, if you go to like Shore Residences, a building that we featured a few months ago, from the street level, it looks very dense because all you see is a big wall of windows. But what you don't see is that if you stand in the middle of the property, all the buildings
there's a lot of space.
Yeah, all the buildings are all the living spaces on the periphery of the property, and there's a big atrium, about 1 hectare in size. Atrium, which is open space for everybody, and that's what afforded them to have the big pool, the jogging paths, and all these other things that, frankly, more developers need to do.
Nice. Okay, David, if I may, let's get Michael in this discussion, because he is, after all, in the design part. So wonderfully put by David is that we have this generation of young people working and earning. So the market is right. And they are, of course, looking into buying real estate property. So what would you say, Michael, should the features of a sustainable city or development that these potential home buyers should be looking at, other than what David just already mentioned, space, jogging paths for lifestyle and all that? What would you say are the features of a sustainable city? What should people consider? And the role of green spaces in it as well.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing a lot, especially through our own work and the projects that we're involved with, is that the emphasis on sustainable design, low carbon design is actually synonymous with quality of life and livability. And these concepts are not mutually exclusive. So in our projects, which have the adequate scale to provide abundance of open space, that's providing, of course, a great amenity for investors and the communities, but it's also providing an ability to support natural systems, whether it's ecological systems like habitat, managing stormwater, cleansing that water, and providing a recreational and social benefits as well. So there's a really unique aspect of open space, which is saying to provide real estate value and environmental value at the same time. We also look extensively at creating value and quality of life through connectivity and enhancing connectivity both for the purposes of movement of goods and people through vehicular transit access, but especially through the pedestrianization of spaces, walkability, bicycle ability, and the ability to make many local trips, whether it's to shops, to school, even to work from your home without relying on private vehicles. And so this is partly around sustainability, but it's also about convenience, and that convenience enhances quality of life and value. I think the idea of amenity, and I guess open space is one of those amenities, but the concept of, and you've heard probably the idea of a 15-minute city or the walkable city. The concept of this is that all the amenities that you need from a day-to-day basis, whether it's shops for food and groceries, whether it's access to schools, access to employment and other recreational and cultural facilities, are all within a very close walking distance of your home. And so there's a lot of great outcomes to that, particularly from, again, the sustainable design perspective, but also from a value creation perspective, where communities and developments can be positioned in a way that you can essentially create a quality of life that means that everything you need is in a very short distance from home. And that convenience, I think, is really valuable.
I'm sure our audience members right now are taking down a lot of notes on what to consider when it comes to now buying my next real estate property. I think both you, Michael and David, just lined that all up, what to consider beautifully, and pointing out everything, by the way, from not just materials, the space, the location, the lifestyle, how everything is accessible to you. Be living in a space that offers all that will also translate to money coming back to you because you save more in this kind of lifestyle. Given you touched on this earlier already, so given the geographic nature of our country, and you did already point out some disaster possibilities, disaster resiliency will always be a consideration, I hope. How is this addressed in design, creating design suited specifically here in the Philippines? And Michael, please jump in with this particular question to David after. David?
So, first of all, we need scale, because developers buying one plot of land here and there is just not going to produce scale. Number two, we are lucky that in the last 10 years, about 130 townships have been started by different developers all across the country. And there's probably another 20 to 50 coming up in the next 10 years. There's a lot of townships
Wow.
in places that were considered very rural. And that's been made possible because of the amount of infrastructure built in these townships, such as roads, new airports, new highways, that made things, provinces that were 8 hours away, now only 4 hours away, now only 2 hours away. Michael and I were talking about commute times, and I don't know if you're aware, Michael, but the average Filipino worker commutes 5 hours a day, round trip. So that's a whole
even
lifetime.
now?
That's now nobody's moving much.
Yeah.
The traffic is significantly less now, but the few weeks that we had regular traffic in November, it took me an hour and a half to get to Ortigas
Oh, that was
Center
terrible. Yeah, December too. You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, David. Now let's have Michael's thoughts on addressing, again, disaster resiliency through designs, specific designs suited for the Philippines. Michael?
Well, I mean, a lot of it comes down to the unique context of a place and how you define or how you identify what the risks are. Of course, coastal development is very different to inland development. So the ideas around resiliency often on the coastlines refer to impacts of sea level rise and storm surge that is impacting you from the coast. And so there's been a pretty dramatic shift in how we respond to coastal development from a design perspective, where in the past there used to be a lot of reliance on hard infrastructure, whether it's levees or seawalls that would provide that resilience. But now we're looking at some really innovative strategies around, we call them living levees, using landscape systems, natural terraced landscape coastal systems to provide that required resilience to coastal communities. And these work as essentially open spaces that are parklands along a coastline, but also provide habitat for marine and coastal ecosystems. So they create resiliency while also providing a natural resource.
Sorry, Michael, do you see this happening already in the Philippines now?
Yes and no. To some degree, there's been some interesting strategies deployed for some of the reclamation projects in Manila Bay, but it's not necessarily come to fruition yet. I think some of the design concepts are still being developed and have yet to be implemented. But anyway, my point is really, I guess the response to resiliency is really dependent upon what we're trying to protect against and what the risks are. But yes, I think there's a lot of opportunity for enhancing our urban design and city design of the coastlines, which are one of the main issues for resiliency for the Philippines.
Besides what you already described, can you actually get into detail about climate change resilient technologies that we can adopt to promote urban resiliency here in the Philippines?
Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of technology, I think I would probably avoid the concept of technology and probably look to more the fundamental design of cities being able to create a framework for success. So what I mean by that is getting your master plan, getting your city design set up in a way that provides the appropriate amount of, I mean, addressing all the issues that we've discussed already, the concepts of adequate open space, getting the infrastructure and roadway systems integrated in the appropriate way, addressing transit, providing enhanced high-capacity transit to major employment centers, mixing of land uses to build in resiliency against, some lockdown implications where people are at home and so far from their places of employment, there's no access opportunities.
That's 5-hour commute that David was talking about earlier.
Yeah, so I think it's a fundamental sort of attitude around creating a master plan, an urban design plan. And I think SMDC is very much on board with these concepts in its creation of new communities that have the major components in place to be forward thinking and address some of those resiliency issues.
Nice. Okay, so again, still we need to work on implementing best practices globally into our local developments. But there's promise already. Some developers are working on that. And speaking of SMDC, back to David, the pandemic changed people's day-to-day routine. And I think both David and I can speak, yes, we know exactly what that means, unfortunately, with the surge recently. So how has SMDC's future-ready master planning been an advantage for residents as people faced and had dealt with COVID-19? David?
So we've helped SMDC acquire many of the properties that it's put condos on. And I think a lot of it is geared towards making life for people easier.
Mm.
So I'll start by saying that they wanted to get properties that are close to the trains as much as possible and very easy to access. So not properties that are more or less in the CBD, but properties that are peripheral to the CBD, but are
Mhm.
accessible to make commute times dramatically lower. Second is that they've looked at the average lifestyle of the middle class and they realized that, hey, you don't need the big living room because you're hardly in your home. You're out of your home most of the time. So what you really need is just the basic bedroom, the privacy of your bedroom, and everything else you can do in the common spaces when you need it. And that's why they've kind of been one of the first to roll out these 25 to 30 square meter condo units. So by making it smaller, they've made and making it accessible to work, they've actually made it democratized. They democratized and made it cheaper. But the third biggest factor here is that the owners of SMDC, well, in particular, Mr. Henry C. Jr., looked at the market and said, okay, why are these developers building these buildings over 7 to 10 year periods? And it's because a lot of the developers wanted to time the building according to the payment schemes of the buyers. And by extending payment terms, so if you can only afford to pay me over a 7 year period, then I will build my building over a 7 year period, right? And during that time, I can offer, if I'm the developer, I can offer the buyer um, developer financing. So in addition to the profit you make in the real estate, you also make a profit on the interest rates, which is a little flawed in my mind. And so they said, you know what, I'm going to build these buildings as fast as I can. And then they go out and get financing their own and then pay me when it's done. And so SMDC's construction projects are actually some of the fastest in the market. So um, they're able to deliver these products at a time when the buyers need it. What's the
Yeah.
point of being 28 years old, buying your first condo unit, only for it to be delivered to you 7, 10 years after when you're like, in your late
A
30s? It
change
doesn't
of
make any
lifestyle. Yeah, you probably have your family already by that time and have different needs, right?
Yeah. And then the open space. So they made it a point now, okay, we build very tall buildings, but the very tall buildings are sitting on very big properties so that there's a lot of open space to be given to the public. Now the open space might be on ground level or on the podium level. I mean, either way, it's open space is open space. And I think what many people do forget is that as a buyer, if you need to evacuate your building, as in the case of a big storm or a big earthquake, and we've
Mm-hmm.
had a couple of those in the last 10 years,
Yes.
where do you go? Where do you go? When you need to evacuate the building, what do people usually do? They hang out on the street because there's nowhere else to go. But by hanging out on the street, you block access to all the emergency vehicles that need to get to you. So
Ooh, you just gave us food for thought, David. Or
so
gave our developers and even our future home buyers something to think about. That's a new question to ask.
if you are an investor in real estate, if you are a homeowner, you have to ask yourself, if you need to evacuate, where do you go? If you need to evacuate, how close is it to the open space, the real open space, where you can just sit there for a few hours just to get your bearings and to secure yourselves and not be in the mob, in the sea of the mob.
Woohoo. Again, but one thing you did cover, David, is that a lot of people, you already pointed out how the well planned communities are within the reach now of the middle income sector, and how really SMDC changed the notion that it is not affordable. It is. It already really is. And I have no doubt that they will continue to focus serving the needs of this particular market. Could I have a yes on that from you, David? When it comes to middle income families? Definitely.
Definitely.
Right?
SMDC is one of the youngest developers in the country, and yet in a very short span of time became the largest in almost every metric, especially in terms of delivery of units and square meters built and revenue and clients served and footprint, because they're almost everywhere in the greater Manila area.
Nice. Let's have Michael pipe in. Speaking of COVID-19, David, what did you mention? 25 to 30 square meter space. Think of design, design inputs from you, Michael, especially if you are living in the time of COVID, probably disasters again with the new ideas that David asked us to consider. What do sustainable cities have to continuously meet the needs of the public sector health, particularly this market?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that what we've really started to do recently is deploy some interesting design tools to optimize the design of neighborhoods from multiple, call it 5 to 6 to 8 urban development blocks, and design these in a way that they're optimized for natural ventilation, for solar access, for views, and create sort of, like I was saying before, sort of the big bones or the inherent framework of these places that are healthier and more livable. And this is during COVID and non-COVID times. There's immense benefits in addressing these factors. The consideration of how a resident may live their life during a period of lockdown is something that we have been considering quite extensively. And as David mentioned, I mean, it's not just about evacuations, but it's also about how do you maintain your health and well-being if you're really
being in that kind of space.
Yes,
yeah, being
exactly.
Within these 4 walls, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so can you have appropriate amount of interactions with your neighbors? Where does that happen? Can you get access to supplies, groceries? Can you have space for physical activity? Can you connect with nature? I mean, there's really been some interesting research about just being able to see and have close interaction with landscape has tremendous benefits on your mental health and well-being. And I think many of us felt the impacts of isolation and the negative impact of that, and what it means if you don't have access to either social activity or open space. So all of these considerations are becoming more acute now in terms of our urban design, and they translate from a larger scale neighborhood down to the individual building and down into individual apartments.
Okay, so the point is, again, livable spaces, basics when it comes to amenities, access, not just to good sewer systems, water, definitely food and essentials, even work, schools. We've covered all that. And I'm actually opening the floor for questions for some of our members from the audience who are watching our webinar today. I see some in the comment section. So if I may, this is from Camille. There's been a growing trend around the world for the past few years, creating more efficiently and practically built sized units. Is this the solution to a more sustainable real estate industry? Those are the key terms. Efficiently and practically built sized units. David, I think this is coming from what you were talking about in the last 2-3 questions that we tackled. I loved how specific she is with words, right?
Well, Michael brought up a point about access to to utilities and groceries and basic needs. And I guess if you look at every SMDC property, not only have they been in very practical cuts, so 25, 30 square meters, but they've also built lap pools. You know that until they came on board and developing lap pools, and I'm not talking about 10-meter lap pools, I'm talking about 50-meter lap pools, and not just one pool, but
Olympic size.
Olympic size pools, and two to four of these kinds of pools, and not just one for all the barangay to share, but
in one development, David.
In one development. Yeah.
Okay.
The middle class never had access to pools. They have to have a friend who lived in or a relative that lived in a big exclusive village that had a pool to be able to access
to enjoy that lifestyle.
Yeah, and there are no jogging paths outside because you get mud, or there are no sidewalks in many of these communities, and yet they brought that to the buyers. And not only that, but they brought in supermarkets on the ground floor, the bank on the ground floor, and if I was living in the SMDC unit, I would probably have access to a COVID-free barber, and all the basic needs for everyday living is there in the building. You don't really have to go outside. You will only need to go outside for work and for play. And for fitness, I was mentioning to Michael that the average Filipino is commuting 5 hours a day. That's a lifetime. Just on your ass in the. Am I allowed to say that word anyway? In the car.
Edit it out.
You're in the car, in the bus, in the tricycle, in the FX, and you're just not doing anything, right? You're just all the calories you've eaten are just stuck. You can't move. But moving closer to work with one of these condos like SMDC allows you to go and make time for your fitness, and
you can just walk.
Besides the gym, and they have massive gyms in many of these areas, and they also have massive entertaining public spaces because you can use the lobby to entertain guests and all that. So I think a lot of that has really changed to address the needs of the middle class as much as possible. And if you ask me about the commercial side, 12 years ago, the first SMDC units were sold for 1.5 million pesos. Today, those same units are selling for 7 to 8 million pesos. So you've had a 5x. You've had a 5x increase in your investment over a span of 12 years, which is a very good return. Second, from what used to rent only for 8,000 pesos a month, is now renting at 25,000 pesos a month for the same unit. So I think in terms of rent income, price appreciation, in terms of access, in terms of making things easy, you can buy a high-end product, one high-end product, or you can buy 15 SMDC products. That's I think how you should look at it, and it's all about the question of diversification.
David, I'm going to put you in the hot spot by answering that last question of Camille. After everything you just said, is this the solution to a more sustainable real estate industry? What's happening right now? Everything you just pointed out, is it the solution?
I think we're doing some things right, but we have to do more.
Okay, nicely put. Michael,
we have to do more.
You want to pipe in on that, Michael?
Look, I don't think there's a silver bullet to the sustainability question. I think it requires this all the ideas we've been talking about today, the holistic thinking around city policy, city design, architecture, infrastructure planning. These are the sort of the ingredients that will build up a platform for a sustainable lifestyle. I think it's well beyond the individual design of a unit, and it's well beyond an individual building, but it's all connected.
Nice. I just don't want Pam to feel bad because Pam asked this question, but actually
Yeah.
both David and Michael already answered it. Pam was
Yeah.
asking what unique features and innovations do SMDC's developments offer that address the health and safety concerns of people amid the pandemic. And like I said, Pam, David actually just answered that. I just wanted to bring up your question so you don't feel left out. But both David already went through that in detail, and even reinforced by Michael. So I'm going to go to this next question from Anthony, because you already pointed out all these developments, particularly condo living. So Anthony's asking, in the coming years, do you think there's a possibility where all of us will be shifting from regular homes to condo living? That's interesting. David, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. That's called the process of urbanization, which is a global phenomenon that every government has tried to slow down, but it just keeps happening. Urbanization happens because of the need for convenience, to be close to the people and to the factors that are important in your life, such as work, such as family, church, grocery, school, etc. And the most efficient land use is really to urbanize, but to urbanize with balance. And yes, we will eventually, all of us will eventually move in, so much so that the landed house will become a luxury, as it is in most developed countries. The other driver for that is that the more that the population becomes wealthier and the more people become wealthy, there will be less and less help, less and less household help. And so the guy who likes to live in his 1,000 square meter floor area house, who employs 2 helpers, 1 cook, then there's the gardener, the pool boy, the works. You've got a staff of 7 people. You're gonna realize that you can't find many of these people anymore to work for you, and because there are other jobs available that are better and better bosses. So I think those 2 things, the urbanization phenomenon and the fact that more and more people are growing up with less help or no help at all, is going to drive people into smaller, more practical living quarters. And if you think a studio unit at 25 to 30 square meters is small, you don't know how the Hong Kong people feel, or the Singaporeans feel, or the New Yorkers, and how they feel when the typical apartment unit is a lot smaller than that.
Actually, you made a point there. Very good point. Thanks, David. Would you like to pipe in, Michael, on this one? Again, the coming years of a possibility shifting from regular homes to condo living?
Well, I think everything David said is true, and David will know the local market better than I will. But I think what you'll probably find as well, if there's great city planning in place, that the transformation from more landed houses and detached homes to condo will focus around some of the upcoming infrastructure investment that David mentioned earlier. New rail, railway stations, of course, light rail, and possibly BRT, bus rapid transit. The location of the condos will hopefully follow access, and the greatest intensity of development and concentration of those higher density housing options will be in very short walking distance to that transportation infrastructure, so that the density comes with the benefit of greater access and opportunity to access employment and other amenities across the city.
So it is, again, urbanization is something that is inescapable.
It can be, and a positive, as long as there's adequate infrastructure support and all the other benefits that we've talked about of open space and features within the community. That density is not inherently a negative thing, and the condo approach is not a negative at all. It will create, I think, other opportunities.
Before I say that is a win-win situation, then Felisa is asking, what can be done for those living in the lower class or poorer communities? Because after all, we want to go through this as a nation. So let's not think about them. David?
So first of all, the government does have a program that for every condo you build, you have to build also for the socialized housing market. And second is that SM does have a program for mass housing, socialized housing in the provinces. But I think we have to go and review the model of socialized housing, because at the moment, socialized housing is your 50 square meter plot of land and your 25, 30 square meter two-story house. And I don't think that model works anymore. It's a lot more efficient land use to build vertical structures. For example, you can build 1,000 apartments in a 2,000 square meter plot of land versus having 2,000 apartments eating up 10 hectares of land. 2,000 single detached homes eating up 10 hectares of land, So, and then you can use the rest of the land for greenscapes and landscapes and other services. And that goes back to having to change our laws about land use.
Oh boy, again, this was actually tackled at the start of our webinar when you're saying it's not just about developers. It really has to go hand in hand with urban planning, government. Everyone has to chip in to make this workable and ideal for everyone, right? So before I let move on to the last question, Michael, any thoughts on especially the design angle for this question from Feliza? For lower class and poorer communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely complicated issue to address, but I think all I would add is the notion of equity to ensure that those communities have the access opportunities to those new features that come along with some of the incredible development and redevelopment of existing urban areas. So the opportunities for enhanced access to employment, opportunity to the open spaces that we've been talking about, to transportation, education, there should hopefully be a benefit to the poorer communities that that exist. And if there is redevelopment occurring, that there is no significant displacement of those communities, so that those social structures can be maintained in the future. I'm sort of speaking very generally, but I think there's some principles that could be adopted to address these issues.
Which is actually going to be a very interesting time in the Philippines as we are going into a new presidential year. You know what I mean? There will be a shift, but that's not our topic today. Okay, so getting back to the topic before I say goodbye and ask you two gentlemen to give us a closing message, here's one last question from Therese. Does living in sustainable developments mean it will be more expensive? Actually, David said no. At present, many people believe that living a sustainable lifestyle is too expensive or costly and actually stray away from it in spite of the positive impacts on health, transport, safety, environment, which you two gentlemen already pointed out. Hey, that's true, David, that's true. People still say, no, not for me. That's true, huh? They still stray away from it, even with the fact that we've talked about all positive things for this past hour. Right?
It's a human problem. Why do people eat junk food? Why do
they stay away from what's good for them?
Why do people immerse in? Why do Filipinos, and Michael might not know this, but Filipinos are the biggest users commit the most amount of time in the world to Facebook, to Instagram, to Pornhub. Assuming these surveys are correct, okay?
You can even say TikTok.
And TikTok, yeah.
TikTok, right.
what do we do with our time? David, okay, I feel it. I feel you. I think you made your point, David. That you're right. It's a human thing and not a real estate buying thing. Maybe that's a question you should all ask yourselves. Thank you, David, for pointing that out. Michael, would you like to say anything about that?
Um, no, David covered that perfectly.
Okay, so let's get you gentlemen off the hook because black and white, we just said it, and we're just being very frank with everybody, okay? Bato-bato sa langit, tamaan, wag magalit. Okay, so gentlemen, last messages from the two of you before we say goodbye. What a very jam-packed webinar it has been. I myself have a lot of notes, but I just didn't write them down. I'll just review or rewatch this webinar. That's the best part about having this online. So let me start with Michael. Closing message, Michael, for our audience, please.
Look, I mean, I think what we've discussed today is really important. It's an important issue that we're trying to collectively address, the issues of climate change and how we can become more sustainable as a society, and the kind of places that we need to create to provide a platform for that sustainable and high quality life. And I think everything is connected and everyone is connected to this issue. And from the design community, through the development community, through the media community, and as individual citizens, I think we all have this role to play. And I think we're all becoming acutely aware that the time is now to act and to be responsible for decisions that affect the planet. And so as a designer, as an urban designer, we're doing everything we can to create that urban environment that will hopefully start to become not just sustainable, but climate positive. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you for that closing message. And now I give the floor to David Leechiu.
Issa, thank you. Michael, thank you. I guess my parting words is that we are going through very tough times. It's some of the most difficult 2 years that humanity has faced in maybe 60 years. But please be optimistic about the Philippines, because despite all these issues, there are many good things happening. We are just not aware of it because we're holed up in our homes. But we are going through the biggest infrastructure program the Philippines has ever seen. And we're not talking about projects that will be completed 12, 15 years from now. They're going to be completed in the next 12 to 15 months. And a big meaningful part of that completed in the last 24 months. So these are just projects around the corner. It will benefit millions upon millions of Filipinos. It will propel us to a path of greater prosperity at a shorter span of time. Elections is here, and some of you might be concerned about who we're electing, why we're electing these people. We are lamenting about the quality of the presidentiables. All I can say is that the president isn't the end all and be all of the country. The second most important part of the equation is who is the next Department of Finance Secretary, because we really have everything that we enjoy today is because of the work, the vision, and the efforts of another person by the name of Secretary Sonny Dominguez, who is the head of finance and the economic team of the country. And where would this country be if not for his efforts complementing that of the president? I would encourage you all to think and spend less time in social media and more into educating how to become better investors and how to make better investment decisions, because sustainability is going to be a very big part of that. And a very big part of your investment success will depend on the kinds of decisions you make today. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that is a challenge indeed. Well said. Thank you so much, David Leechiu and Michael Powell, for truly valuable insights. In fact, I think we got more than what we bargained for in this 1 hour long webinar. And if I may share what I find most relevant, just bring it back to our main topic today, really, we should consider the future generations in how we choose to live today. Let's not be selfish, okay? Let's keep the next generation and future generations in mind, whether we have children of our own or not. So thank you again, David, Michael. What a pleasure to
Thank
have
you.
chatted with you. To everybody watching, please feel free to share this live stream with your environmentally conscious family members and friends as well, who might happen to be looking into investing in sustainable properties in the very near future. And by the way, please let us know your thoughts on the topic. Tag us on social media at Philippine Star and at Property Report PH. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And most of all, to SMDC for helping make this webinar possible. Thank you, everybody. My name is Issa Litton, your host, and this has been the Philippine Star and Property Report.ph's webinar, Sustainability in the City, Planning Responsibly for this generation and the next.